that good? Okay. Uh, so much for the plans, right? Well, thank you, Gay. Um, so before I start, I have to tell you that as a result of showing up at the vigil last night, which was a great, powerful moment and a treat for me to be able to do, um, as I was standing there listening to some of the people speak, I realized that I have to amend the title of my sermon. Because, of course, I created the title about a week and a half ago before I really knew very much about you. And the title was, if you remember or if you can read, Building an Amazing Future. But I've decided that you already are living an amazing future. And so I wanted to say something like building a more amazing, more future, because you are already there. Somebody spoke at the vigil last night and said that make America great again is really the wrong sentiment, because America has already been great, and it's a matter of making it more great rather than great again. And so I thought the same for my title here. So it has really been wonderful to be with you this weekend. I've had really a super time. I got to meet with about 45 people, and I want to start out by thanking so many people who helped organize this. I'll probably forget some, but I'll mention some names. Reverend Gay, of course, helped get this all organized, and Pam and Catherine from the board, and Stephen got me all kinds of information about the finances here, and Laura sent me all sorts of information as well, and no doubt probably others that I'm forgetting. So thank you all for making this weekend possible. So I want to start out by saying, offering a little bit of a confession here. So I'm one of the crazy ones. I'm one of the few people who likes to wander around Unitarian Universalist congregations and talk about money. And I know that seems like a crazy thing. But, and we heard something about crazy people yesterday during our afternoon workshop. But I have to say that what I do is really only partly about money. But it is definitely about money, but it's really only partly about money, and it's really more about love and justice, which is what we talked about last night at the vigil as well, standing on the side of love and justice in the face of hate and oppression and challenges to vulnerable people. By the way, I got a chance. I of course, didn't know very much about Augusta, Georgia. I've not been here before, although I've been to some of your neighboring congregations. I've been to Athens, worked with the congregation there, and Marietta, the congregation there, and Greenville, South Carolina. But I got to learn a little bit about the monument, the Confederate monument that's downtown. And you probably all know this, but I learned that what it says on it, it's got some statues of Robert E. Lee and some other generals and a war hero sergeant, I believe it is, at the top. And then it says on it, no nation rose so white and fair. And so it's no wonder that people find this to be an oppressive thing to think of in our modern times. And to quote Ruth McClellan Nugent, an associate professor of history at Augusta University, those statues, all these Confederate statues, were erected after the end of Reconstruction, and they're really celebrating the loss of black civil rights as much as anything, much more than they are truly war memorials. So we Unitarian Universalists were represented loud and proud at the vigil. There were 5 of us, we counted, out of about 45 or 50 people, so more than 10% of us were there, which I think is quite wonderful. And my wife and I we live at the moment in Wilmington, Delaware. My wife does transitional ministry, much as Reverend Gay did before joining you as your settled minister, and she's currently the developmental minister in Wilmington, so that's where we live. We were at a vigil just after Charlottesville last week, one of these vigils that was called that afternoon via social media, and saw about 300 people show up. And out of those 300 people, at least 40 or 50 were Unitarian Universalists from the 3 or 4 congregations that are nearby. And one thing I was struck by, one of the speakers was a Lutheran bishop, and he spoke, and he had been in Charlottesville, and he started out his talk by mentioning, and we were the only people he mentioned, how strong the presence of Unitarian Universalists was in Charlottesville and was at that vigil in Wilmington. And my thought at the time, and I don't know whether this is true or not, but my thought at the time was that 10 years ago, this Lutheran bishop might not even have known what Unitarian Universalist was, Unitarian Universalism was, but now he knows that we're out there and that we're strong and that we're standing on the side of love and justice. So I think we have come a long way, and you here have come a long way as well. I want to remind you, I think it's in all the work that we do talking about money, it's important to keep track of our mission, because that's what the money is really all about. And so I'd like to read you your mission statement, because I like to keep it in my mind. And what it says is that your mission is to create a beloved community acting together with compassion, reason, and respect, empowering us to promote a just society. So I ask you, what could be more important at such a time as this? Could Unitarian Universalism be any more important than it is today? We've seen a real uptick in interest in UU congregations since the election. And of course, many things have happened since then, including Charlottesville, immigration and customs enforcement raids, the tensions with North Korea. We are called, we Unitarian Universalists, we're called to stand in love and justice, in compassion, to be present and accounted for, to be a safe place for vulnerable people. I love the story about Sanctuary. To be a safe place for vulnerable people, and there are many people feeling vulnerable in our society and in our world these days. To be a source of strength and love, to stand up to hate and bigotry and fear. You have a strong history, which I learned this weekend here. You have a strong history in this realm going way back. You probably know many of these things, but I heard many stories about the open door kindergarten that you had here. Was it in the 50s or the 60s? In the 60s, when it was illegal to have an integrated school here in Augusta. You did it here. And one of the things you'll learn if you join me at the later on session afternoon is that I asked people who met with me over the weekend to complete a short survey. And one of the questions is about milestones in the life of the congregation. And I didn't get a chance to tally everything up, but more than half of the people mentioned that as one of their 3 milestones. So I just think that that is really awesome. And I think it's important to keep track of our history and of the things that we have succeeded in doing, because the more that we keep those things in mind, the more we know that we can create those kinds of things again, that we can build that future again on the past, on the successes that we've had in the past and in the current times. I also learned that you performed the first gay union ceremony here in Augusta. And of course, you were an active, welcoming congregation. These things are so important to me. They're what motivate me to wander around and do the crazy work of talking about money. So let me tell you a little bit about that, because my ministry really has become a stewardship ministry, what I think of as a stewardship ministry. And I've been doing this work for about 10 years. And I ask myself quite often how I got to this place. You know, how does anyone get to any place where we are? I started out as a Unitarian Universalist around 1980 at a large church that was also UUCA in Arlington, Virginia. It was the Unitarian Universalist Church of Arlington, although back then it was just UCA. They didn't add the Universalist yet until later in the 80s. But back then, my wife and I joined, and we were attracted to the church primarily for its social justice program. And we got involved in all kinds of large social justice projects, some illegal, as you did here. That church, before we were there, also did a lot of work with integration in Virginia when it was illegal. But what we did back in the 80s was we declared ourselves a sanctuary for Central American refugees. And that was a big deal, and it was really controversial within the church and within the community. But we did it, and we stood on the side of right and on the side of justice and on the side of love. We also did some other things. We created, with other churches, a roving homeless shelter in Arlington County. Arlington County is a fairly wealthy county, but it has a large poor population and a large homeless population. And the county was not doing its job of providing enough beds, and so the churches put this coalition together, and we participated, hosting the homeless folks 1 week a month for 6 months of one winter. And the whole idea of that was to shame the county into fixing the problem and building more facilities, and they did that, so we were successful with that. So I generally think of myself as a social justice person. So how then did I wind up being a money person? Because that's how I spend my time right now. Well, in addition to being a social justice person, I'm also kind of a music person, and I'm a big Beatles fan. In fact, about 2 weeks ago at our church in Wilmington, we did a Beatles service, and the sermon, it wasn't my wife, but it was a guest speaker, spoke about the messages in the Beatles music. And I'm an amateur musician, used to be playing wedding bands when I was growing up in New York City, and I'm an accordion player. And another secret that I share with you. And I got to play the accordion in this rock band that did the Beatles music. And what I think of about our mission and about Unitarian Universalism and about money, the Beatles, of course, sang quite a few songs about money. And the two that come to mind, one is Money Can't Buy Me Love, and the second is All You Need Is Love. And I've come to the conclusion that they're half right. That all you need is love is good, I'll buy that, but money can buy you love, at least in the context of our Unitarian Universalist congregations. Money is part of the lubricant that makes things happen. It's part of the way that we marshal our resources and enable our staff and enable our facilities to do the important work that we have to do. So money can buy love in our UU congregations, despite the claims of the Beatles that it might not. So, as I said, I'm a stewardship junkie, so I figure I should start out a little bit, or tell you at some point, a little bit about what stewardship means. So I did some research, and I went to that fount of wisdom called Wikipedia, an ancient fount of wisdom, and I searched for stewardship, and the answer I liked the best was that stewardship is taking care of something that one does not own. And I really like that for a lot of reasons. Number one, it's got taking care of in it, which I think is an important thing. So we're not raising money just for the sake of raising money, nor are we marshaling all of the resources we have just for the sake of building buildings or marshaling resources, but of taking care of something. And that something is our Unitarian Universalist faith and our legacy and our movement and our traditions and our power in the world. And then the idea that we don't really own this place, I think, is a very powerful message as well. I think of ourselves as being temporary custodians or temporary stewards of this church that goes back long before we were here and will continue long after we're gone. So that's what I think of as stewardship for myself. And the reason I love to do this work is I think about the impact that Unitarian Universalists have had on issues like marriage equality, Black Lives Matter, sexuality education, green sanctuary, social action networks around the country. We are a small denomination, only about 200,000 adults in a country of, 300 million people or so. But I think our impact has been really outsized, particularly in the marriage equality and in civil rights. We've had major impact all around the world, all around the country in particular. And I think, imagine, and so that's the kind of the outward face of Unitarian Universalism, but then think about the value of this congregation to each of you on a personal level. I heard very moving stories during the weekend from people about what this church means to them and what it has meant to them in times of need, in times of crisis, in times of really a need for faith development and for support and compassion, and you have always been here. And so I ask, imagine, so you Unitarian Universalists in general, have so much to be proud of. But just imagine how much we could accomplish with additional resources, with additional investment. And you are seeing that firsthand right now with the grant funding that you've received to fund your very ambitious and exciting outreach and growth program. Money can buy a membership coordinator. Money, did I see your membership coordinator? Oh, there she is. And money can buy your growth plan and your plan to reach out to the new folks who are going to be coming here for the Cyber Center. I think it really is the future that's here right now that you will be making into a more and even better future. Now, as far as money goes, I especially love capital campaigns where we're talking about big money. And I see capital campaigns as a once-a-generation opportunity to really give back and invest in the future and in this faith and in this congregation that we believe in so deeply. Capital campaigns tap into a deep spiritual need of individuals and faith communities. As I think Gay mentioned, I've worked with about 50 congregations over the last 10 years and about 15 capital campaigns, and they've all been incredibly wonderful experiences. And you are ready to do one here. I am certain of it after spending my time with you this weekend. But capital campaigns are a lot more about building community than they are about building buildings. They build confidence. They are tremendous community building events. They build confidence. They strengthen governance. They strengthen leadership. They provide opportunities for everybody to be involved in all different kinds of ways. And I'll talk more about that again at the session later on. They help strengthen covenants and help us work together to make big decisions. You've already experienced much of that by having made a lot of the preliminary decisions to go ahead and buy the neighboring property, which is always an exciting thing for congregations to do. I'm almost always a fan of adding real estate, and certainly in this case I am. They also provide opportunities for people with high economic capacity to participate at very high levels. And we Unitarian Universalists and Americans in general are pretty philanthropic, generous people, and people with means are often looking for opportunities. Capital campaigns provide those opportunities. But at least as important, there are opportunities for people of any means and no means to participate in all kinds of ways, involving everyone in the excitement and what a colleague of mine down in Orlando called the hoopla of capital campaigns can be incredibly energizing and powerful for a congregation. Now, there are several keys to success, and like I said, I'll talk more about that in the session this afternoon, but you have many of those already in the works. And one of the magical things that I've seen about capital campaigns is I do, and I'll talk more about this too, but I do kind of a balance sheet for congregations, looking at pluses and looking at challenges, things that need to be addressed to make a capital campaign successful. And the magic of capital campaigns is that just the act of planning for it and carrying it out makes those things happen, makes those challenges, helps those challenges get addressed. It truly is alchemy. Now, some of you I think I met over the weekend were here when you did the last, what I think of as major capital campaign that built this sanctuary back in the 1980s. Reverend Gay gave me a piece of your newsletter from 1984 that talked about kind of the close of the campaign. Who among you, who was here for that? Why don't you stand up so we can thank you for the work that you did on this. Thank you. Oh. So can you imagine the leap of faith that it took? I assume the group was smaller then. The group was smaller then. The leap of faith that it took to build this beautiful building, this beautiful sanctuary, raising the money, thinking, what is the future going to be? A capital campaign is always a leap of faith like that. But drawing on the success that you've had in building this building, and of course in doing several other smaller campaigns that I learned about where you raised more money than you had hoped, these will serve you well as you plan this one. So look around the room at your fellow members here. I'm convinced from my weekend with you that you will be able to do this, that you are ready to do this. You have the leadership in place. You have the foundation in place. You have the long-range vision and plans. You have the growth opportunity here. So I ask you, is there a better investment that you can make than in this congregation right now? One last thing I'll say is that important in the success of this will be thinking big. Not crazy big, but almost crazy big, I would say. And I leave you with this quote from Daniel Burnham, who was an urban planner. And he wrote, "Make no plans. They have no magic to stir the blood, and probably themselves will not be realized." So go forth and make big plans. Big plans are the ways that you can be successful. And please join me later for further conversation.